Hello, my friends. My name is Gerdes. I'm just a professor trying to provide context in the war in Ukraine. So I have six big stories for you today, and there seems to be this weird shifting politically, and you'll see that play out in the stories that we're talking about. The Russian government plans to lay off at least 400,000 civil servants by July 1st of 2025. That's a 10% workforce reduction in the territorial divisions. The cuts could exceed that figure, and they probably will because they need the manpower. They need to reduce the burden on the state and also shift people into private sector, either into manufacturing arms or into the war itself, impacting over 0.5% of the workforce, reports Kommersant. Like, that's a significant thing. And what's happening in Russia, like, watch the economy, and every indicator seems to be showing poorer and poorer health of the Russian economy. Okay, second big story. Let's look what's going on in Europe. And this is a multi-part thing about how things are shifting in Europe. So the British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, and French President Emmanuel Macron are scheduled to meet on Monday to discuss persuading Joe Biden to end the U.S. catastrophic policy forbidding Ukraine from striking Russian airfields and missile launchers, and to authorize Ukraine's use of Storm Shadow missiles for strikes deep into Russian territory. This was reported by The Telegraph. Officials in London hope Biden will grant this authorization before the end of his term. Starmer and Macron are also expected to discuss the potential implications of a future Trump presidency. So they're trying to figure out what to do with Trump. And they're taking a different posture than maybe Europeans took back in 2016. They know that they need to play well with Trump in order to secure help for Ukraine. So the dynamics have shifted significantly. Poland is seeking to form a strong alliance with Britain and other key EU nations to prevent any potential sellout of Ukraine if Trump takes the White House in 2025. So they're bracing against that, but it seems less and less likely that it's going to go quite that way. Like the Americans seem to think the most that this is going to happen, and then the Ukrainians are kind of going, well, he's not going to be worse than Biden because what Biden's done here, and then the Russians don't seem to be signaling that this is actually going to happen. So we just don't know what's going to happen, and anybody who says that they do, they don't know what they're talking about. Prime Minister Donald Tusk is set for urgent talks with leaders like Macron and NATO chief Rutte and Starmer amid concerns that the new U.S. administration might cut deals with Putin. Trump has hinted at ending the war within 24 hours, raising fears of compromise at Ukraine's expense. We must secure strong Western support for Ukraine. There's two things I want to say there. First, Europeans are right to do this, to take more initiative, to get together, to figure out how to, they talk about it as Trump proofing. I don't think that's good language. How to take European problems on European shoulders as much as possible. That would be a better way of saying it. But when they're dealing with Trump, like, you got to understand, Trump never speaks for clarity. He always speaks to say something's hyperbolic. He's going to build a wall and make Mexico pay for it. Now, he did build much of it. Mexico didn't exactly pay for it. That would be not fair. But when he says he's going to finish it within 24, he's just speaking hyperbolically. So you can't take Trump and try to say, well, he said X. And like with precision, like you would unpack the Bible, say, well, that means this. It's not likely that it ever will mean exactly that. So understand that. Now, let's keep moving. Lithuanian Defense Minister Lauranas Kasiunas believes that European countries should not repeat the mistake of 2016 and create a barrier with newly elected U.S. President Donald Trump, but instead work together on issues of common interest. Look, you don't have to agree with everything, right? Many of you are on the left side of the spectrum and wouldn't agree with me on many other political points, but we can agree on this, and so let's work together on those things that we can agree on and work forward. Okay, Donald Trump is indicative of a pattern that we have seen in other nations that is turning to the right wing. So there are countries that have more right-leaning tendencies. Now, that doesn't mean that you need to turn everything right-leaning, but he can hear and speak to clearly certain leaders better than others. Like Keir Starmer is probably in a really good position because Britain has a unique relationship with the United States going back for more than a century, right? The century before, not so much with the War of 1812, and the century before that with the Revolution, not exactly. He's in a unique position. The rest of and now Keir will get along with Biden a lot better just philosophically. Trump is on a different place. Like Trump gets along better with Bibi Netanyahu just because philosophically they're on the same page. But he can also get along pretty well with the Poles and the Baltic states because they kind of speak a little bit of the same language. With Mark Rutte, because he was center right, they speak a little bit more of the same. Maloney, they speak a little bit more of the same language. And so they should capitalize on that and try to work on the things where they can. Okay. Here's another person that he could probably get along with a little bit better, and that is the candidate for Chancellor of Germany from the largest opposition party, the Christian Democratic Union. Friedrich Merz promises to focus on Germany's interest in foreign policy, particularly in relations with Donald Trump. So Europe just has to play differently. And part of this is an exterior threat causes us to overlook certain differences and work together. That's how human beings tend to behave. Meanwhile, Schultz said that he would resume talks with Putin. Quote, "Yes, I decided to talk to the Russian president at the right time, but I'm a responsible politician. I don't do it alone," said the German chancellor. And a little bit later, he talks about, he added that the first plans were to talk with the Ukrainian authorities and many others. I don't know that he thinks he's going to somehow convince Russia to do something different or what. This was what Macron was doing very early in the war and kind of realized that Putin just wasn't going to be going down that path. Okay, meanwhile, again, Trump assumes office on January 20th, and they will do something to have at least some appearance of having some conversation. But if you think that Trump actually thinks that he will actually get it resolved on day one, I don't think that's even in his mind. Okay, now Trump has reportedly had a phone call with Putin, according to the Washington Post. Trump's calls with world leaders are not being conducted with the support of the State Department or U.S. government interpreters. So the main points of the call, as according to the Washington Post, carried in the Kyiv Post here, is that he advised Putin not to escalate the war with Ukraine. Well, that didn't seem to go over well. Today was the largest day of Russian casualties. Putin just keeps trying to push. He reminded Putin of U.S. substantial military presence in Europe. I don't think Trump is just rolling over and doing what Putin wants. It's yet to be determined what he's going to do, but I just don't see that happening at this point. And they planned another follow-up phone call. It's yet to be determined what's going to happen. Now, the Kremlin denied the Putin-Trump phone call, as reported by the Washington Post, which is always a suspicious thing to my mind. Here's Dmitry Peskov saying that there was no conversation. This is false information, pure fiction. The Washington Post reported that Trump spoke with Putin. According to the interlocutor, Trump privately made it clear that he would support an agreement in which Russia would retain new regions. Can you please tell whether there was really a conversation on whose initiative it took place and whether it's true that Trump said that he would support a peace treaty that would leave new regions for Russia? This is the most obvious example of the quality of information that is now being published, sometimes even by quite reputable publications. It is completely untrue. It is pure fiction. That is, it is simply false information. So there was no phone call between Putin and Trump last week? You mean? I just said that. I'm just clarifying on the content. Is that the fact? You mean there was no conversation? There was no conversation. Now, people will hear what they want to hear in any of Donald Trump's statements. He makes himself opaque enough that they can read into it. It's like a U2 lyric. So some people will seize upon this support a peace treaty that would leave new regions for Russia. Wait a minute. Donald Trump had this conversation and maybe he said that? And some people will seize on other things that were said, like reminding Putin of the U.S.'s substantial military presence in Europe. So it's yet to be determined what's going to happen with that. Time will tell, and we just have to take a wait-and-see attitude. Now, NATO Admiral Rob Bauer is reminding that a Russian victory in Ukraine could undermine U.S. interests. And the last thing that Donald Trump wants is to go down in history as a weak president or the president that lost America's stature in the world. And that is good for Ukraine. Okay, a couple other pieces of news. Belarus has officially become a partner of the BRICS. Now, a country partner of the BRICS is a mandatory step before joining the organization. Here are the BRIC member states: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and recently added Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, United Arab Emirates. And the only member of the BRICS that really matters in a substantial way, just like look at nominal GDP. Here, like just look at it, 18, right? China is the only one that really matters. All the rest of them are lightweights in comparison, and China does most of its trade with the West, and it's only a trading bloc, so nothing to worry about. Okay, next story. According to El País, citing a source in the Ukrainian armed forces, the number of Ukrainian troops involved in the operation in the Kursk region now surpasses those deployed in Donbass. Despite occasional shortages of weapons and equipment, there are no issues with personnel. Troop rotations in Kursk occur every 10 days, while in Kharkov, Donbass, it averages every 25 days. A sergeant from the 225th Assault Battalion noted that their mission in the Kursk region is to keep going forward. Okay, so I was showing you something this morning where Russia was doubling down on putting troops around that area as well, and so the Ukrainians are pushing forward as well. Okay, next big story, and this is really interesting. Ukraine has signed deals with Denmark to purchase 535 million euros worth of weapons, funded by the governments of Denmark and Sweden and interest from frozen Russian assets. Ukrainian manufacturers will supply artillery, drones, anti-tank, and missile weapons to the armed forces. Now, this is key. It's coming from Ukrainian manufacturers in Ukraine. And this is the actual Ministry of Defense of Ukraine website. And look at this. According to the results of the agreements, Ukrainian manufacturers of arms and equipment, both state and private, will supply the armed forces with self-propelled artillery, installations, attack drones, anti-tank weapons, and missile weapons. Thanks to the Danish model, which involves direct financing of manufacturers, Ukraine has already received 50 million euros. This is the way of the future for Ukraine. They're going to be funding other European nations will be funding them to build their own material. Jay and Keefe showed this map. In authoritarian regimes, PR is everything. Fake it before you make it. The globes in Russian schools now show 20% of Ukraine as Russian territory. They're going to have to revise this in some time. Finally, Glasnost Gone posted this. A whole lot of countries in Europe, but only one willing to fully defend European democracy. What a great visual image that is. All right, my friends, thank you for your time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes, the coffees, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.